I gotta admit everybody.
Yes.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I just want to do a double check. Can people online hear me?
Yes,
Okay,
we can.
thank you, Rob.
Kevin.
Perfect, thank you. This is Dominic Zerlo with the Department of Health, and we're here right now with our hybrid meeting for the Propagation Committee with Chris Peskuski as the chair, and he is here actually next to me, and I'll turn the mic over to him in just a moment. But just a few usual reminders, we do record this meeting, and so we will be recording it. Thank you to everybody who is joining us online, and thank you to everybody who is joining us here in person. Just as a reminder, the main reason why we do not have everybody visually on camera is because we do understand that there are some people who live in areas that do not have very good internet, and we want to make sure they don't drop off and have to rejoin any more than they need to. And so that's part of it, because the video actually takes up a lot of bandwidth, and so that's why we typically do not have people on video. And then the other thing is, just because we are recording this, please remember to keep language, appropriate, so that we don't have to bleep things out. So even if you're doing things like mentioning names of certain products, some of them may not have appropriate language in them for younger people. And so please remember just to refer to them then as either a product or using initials, and that would be fine. And so with that, I will turn the meeting now over to Chris.
Thank you, Dominic. And it's so good to see some of you in person, and thank you for those of you who are attending online too. As is kind of ritual in this space, I always like to start out with 30 seconds for us to get centered and to just to remind ourselves why we're coming to this space, why we're doing this work, and to build a little container of compassion for a world that is seen more than its fair share of crisis. So stay with me for 30 seconds, please. All right, so I'm going to go around and have everybody introduce themselves here in the room first, and then we'll take introductions from online. Remember, if you want to have a vote, if we do end up voting on something today, you need to have introduced yourself and be from New Mexico. So let us know who you are and where you're from, and if you have any affiliations, please.
And you can actually just keep that one on. Yeah, and just raise your hand if you'd like to speak.
Hi, everybody. James Pereira from Ignites Energy. Hello, my name is Eric Baca, and I don't have any affiliation. I'm a New Mexico resident. And
Oh, and then you can use it. They're pretty weak mics, so try to talk like pretty close to it.
Hi, my name is Debbie Maestas Trainer, and I am a New Mexico resident.
I'm Randy Trainer. I'm also a New Mexico resident.
John Starr, New Mexico resident as well.
James Blackboard out of Clovis, New Mexico. I'm super excited about the work that everybody's doing. Personally see the benefits of this and super excited to be a part of it. So thanks everybody for everything.
My name is Manny Griego. I am from New Mexico. I have no affiliations with anybody, but I'm very, very interested in what's going on here.
Thank you, everyone. At this time, we'll go to the online forum. If you'd like to introduce yourself, please raise your hand.
Okay, let's see. It looks like we've got James Brown first.
James, you may unmute yourself.
Afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Chris, again, for being chair of this propagation committee. James Brown. I'm a doctor of pharmacy here in New Mexico. And I'm representing 5 Degrees North Healing Foundation, a nonprofit organization. I'm psychedelic facilitator trained in psilocybin, and I'm excited to be here today and contribute.
Esteban, you may unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Esteban Hernandez, president of the New Mexico Mycology Guild and owner of New Mexico Fungi. Thank you.
Brett, you may unmute yourself.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. It's Brett Phelps from calling in from Las Vegas, New Mexico today, resident in Mora. I am an attorney, not affiliated with any organizations. Just here to help out and see what we can do to get this thing going. Yeah, I'm glad to be back. I've been real busy lately, missed a couple meetings, and yeah, glad to be back helping out.
Dr. Fatemi, you may unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. I'm Dr. Lita Fatemi. I'm here with Conscious Physician Psychedelics Academy. We are a local New Mexican academy teaching about psilocybin mainly, and we're in our third month of our cohort going strong for the next 9 months. So glad to be here, and thank you for all the work you're doing.
Stephanie Duquette, you may unmute yourself.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Duquette. I am a grower up in Santa Fe. I own Santa Fe Mountain Mushrooms, and I'm interested in the production side of everything.
Gregory Evans, you may unmute yourself.
Greetings. I wish I was there. I hope you guys are all having a great time. I am Gregory Evans. I am an independent researcher and home mycologist with no affiliations. I'm based out of Santa Fe, and my intention is to support the program's development through committee recommendations aligned with emerging research and best practices.
Excellent. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for introducing yourselves and being part of this process. It's awesome, and we're going to go to some program updates from. I'm sorry, actually, look, can you post the agenda in the chat, please? So today we're going to get a program update. We're going to talk about some of the first rules that have come out of the Department of Health that we're going to start checking out. I don't know that they've actually become regulations yet, but it's a part of the process. I'm sure you'll get that in the program update. And then we're going to make a little time for further proposals for this committee, and then any discussion, and we'll talk about the next meeting. So I'll turn it over to Dominic.
Yeah, you can use that too. Okay. Yeah, we'll just have you the assessments.
So just so everybody knows, part of the process is that right now we are working on writing and finalizing the actual rule draft. So we took the recommendations from the committee and we are converting them on over to the rule draft. One of the sections that we do have that's fairly complete, and I give this with the caveat, is that there still may be some minor changes before we have to submit it to the registrar for final publication. Now, when I say final publication, that is for the rule hearing. So even once we publish it, or I'm sorry, I shouldn't say publish. Once we announce it, there will be a minimum of 30 days before the rule hearing itself. And so that'll be a public announcement. We'll also send it out through, if you've signed up for the e-news, we'll send it out through there as well, so that everybody is able to read through and look at the full list and the full set of regulations. And then people will have the opportunity opportunity during that 30-day period to make comments and actually if we miss something. So for example, even in this version, I noticed a typo. We got that fixed already before we printed it, but you know, things like that if you see it, or if you say, wait a minute, that's not what we determined and what we said, we need to revisit this a little bit. This is the opportunity to be able to do all of that. Once the rule hearing occurs and once that's finished, then what will happen is the hearing officer from the rule hearing will actually give us a report back, and it will include those items of public comment. And so, and the hearing officer will make suggestions as whether to adopt or not adopt those particular changes or different items. Once that happens, if there are no major changes, so for example, say you all find out that I misspelled psilocybin on every line, that's perfectly fine. We can make that adjustment because it's simply a typo, for example, or another minor adjustment, and then the rule will be what's called promulgated. Once it's promulgated, that means it becomes final and it is in effect. So the timeline on this is we are hoping to have this and have the announcement before the end of March. We are hoping to have the hearing. We have it tentatively scheduled for April 24th, but it depends exactly when we get everything on in, just to let everybody know. And so once that portion occurs, then everybody, like I said, will be able to come and do that. We'll be holding it in Santa Fe at the Department of Health. And then you'll be able to provide additional input. And then once it is promulgated, and so it's finalized and goes into effect, that's still not the end of it. And I know I've talked about this in a lot of the meetings, because what happens is anytime you're starting a program and you start implementing things, we do find there are either errors, there are mistakes, there are things that just don't work really well. So we'll go through a period of time where we will be looking at that and looking at what revisions need to happen. And then several months down the line, unless we actually got it perfect the first time, which I don't ever know of anybody who's perfect, including all of us. So, but if that happens and we are able to make changes, we will hold additional rule hearings and adjust the rules. So that's one of the big things to remember. The other aspect to remember is we have to do this within the bounds of the statute. I know there are a lot of times where people will say things like, well, we would like to do this, but if it's not included within what the statute actually allows us to do, we can't write rules on it. And so we also have to be very careful with that. And so just to let everybody know, with propagation, I don't really see very much with regard to that, but there are some other areas where people have had questions and concerns. But like, for example, we can't turn around and have intra or interstate sources for psilocybin. That means all the psilocybin has to come from inside New Mexico. So all the mushrooms for it need to be grown in New Mexico. They can't turn around, and we won't be licensing someone who's in Colorado to, grow in Colorado and transport it here. They can't do that. And that's because it's federally illegal. So we can't do those sort of things. So there are going to be some things where people don't necessarily realize that. We understand that. We're happy to explain it. We're happy to go through it. And we're happy to have additional discussions as we move down the road. And that's happened quite a few times over things. So does that make sense? Am I explaining myself well?
Yes.
Okay. Questions or anything from either everybody here or online? Yeah.
Someone in Colorado wants to come here to grow mushrooms. Is there a time period that they have to be a resident or anything like that?
So we've actually had quite a few discussions about that, and it really fits in under the constitutional dormancy clause in the Constitution, where only Congress can actually regulate businesses between states and that sort of thing. And so our attorneys have said very clearly that we cannot restrict it with regard to New Mexico residents being here. And so there is that aspect of it. However, we are including in, because we've gotten some feedback and from some very good attorneys talking about things like predatory financial interests and things like that. And so we are including that within the regulations because we hear very clearly people have concerns that they want to ensure that this is by New Mexicans and really focused on New Mexicans. And so that is one aspect that we're trying to honor as best as we can within those restrictions. I hope that helps and makes sense. And so, I mean, I guess I'll just say it now, but what people are seeing in front of them here in person, and we're going to be putting it up on the screen here in just a minute or so on the computer, is we have a version, like I said, a portion of what we've written, which is actually about the permit application requirements that producers would have to submit to be able to do. And so that actually shows quite a bit. And in fact, James, to your comment, the section 9 actually does include the sections about things like dual ownership, non-transference of that, actual control, and for example, nominee, straw, and proxy ownership, which is more about, for example, you can't have someone come in as a management company and say that, oh, we're going to go ahead and we're going to make a contract with you because you're a New Mexico resident, and we're suddenly, though, going to control everything and all the profits and everything else from it. So there are several things with regard to that to be able to help with that sort of thing. And so we have that. Is that actually the next item on the agenda, Chris?
Yeah, I believe it is. Is there anything else from the program we should update before we get into this stuff?
Yeah, so before we do that, we've already talked about the fact that the governor has signed the equity fund portion and the research fund. So that's $630,000 going to the equity fund. So that's fantastic. And we'll be working on some of that in the equity group as to the requirements for it. And then there was also $300,000 that went to UNM and Dr. Lehman's programs that he's doing with regard to research. So that's going to continue moving forward. So that's fantastic news for research about psilocybin here in New Mexico. And then the other thing is, I do want to, we've mentioned her on some of the meetings, but I'm going to introduce her now and she doesn't know I'm doing it. But we also do have Leslie Peterson, who has joined our team just this last couple of weeks and who is our new senior compliance officer. And we do also have our environmental scientist is going to be joining us starting next week, and we'll introduce him when he starts here coming on up. And so other than that, the program and with our attorneys at the Department of Health otherwise, we have been focused on working on those regulations. And so that's really where a lot of our time is. So by the way, if anybody has gotten a delay in us responding to an email or a phone call, that's actually why. Please forgive us. We're trying to get this all done so that we can get it out as soon as possible. And part of the reason why for that as soon as possible, I guess I should have talked about this part before as well, is that we're looking at this from a reverse timeline. If we're saying that we're going to the first patients in December, it really means that we need to be permitting the cultivators this summer. And so by doing this with the rules, because it will take some time even after the rule hearing, then what will end up happening is we'll have an application process, and that's why we're actually sharing this part, because we want to get some ideas on it, if we've got it in the right, if we're on the right pathway for it. But we'll have that application process so that cultivators can actually start applying, and laboratories as well, so that they then can start growing the psilocybin mushrooms so that we have them available for patients come December. I hope that makes sense as well.
Yes, thank you. And then I do have one more question. I feel like the Propagation Committee is probably going to start meeting a little more infrequently since we've gotten a big chunk of this material out of the way. But what is going to be the next priority, and where can people shift their attention and time resources?
Well, I do think that the Propagation Committee will be able to back off on the frequency of meetings somewhat, but we are going to have that point where we need to evaluate what the rules are once they actually go into effect. So for example, is it allowing for quality cultivators, quality laboratories to apply? Are we excluding people or organizations? Is it something that's going to be valuable? So I do think we're going to have that evaluation piece, but that's going to be a little bit down the road. And so I do think that the next steps from a cultivation and a laboratory standpoint is going to be about, once the rules are promulgated and they go into effect, is going to be starting to do that evaluation. Now, on the other side, our next steps and our next set of rules is really going to be about the practitioners, so the providers, making sure that we have the requirements, what education is going to be required. That's going to be one of the next steps. And the other one is the patient requirements. So what additional requirements are there for those individuals who are qualified? So for example, because it is a medical program, I know that in that particular committee meeting about patient qualifications, one of the things that has come up and been presented is what kinds of examinations need to occur to ensure that that patient is indeed a qualified patient. What kinds of records are needed? And so, and again, part of our purpose is we want to make sure that it is appropriate and a safe program. And so that we don't want to put a lot of barriers up, but we also need to make sure that people are doing this for medical reasons because it is not a recreational program. But so those are the next two steps, I would say. And then after that, and I should mention, it's not like we're just doing one step at a time. They're happening in, parallel courses. But then the next big one to concentrate on is going to be the locations. So what exactly do we mean and what does the statute mean when it says this must occur in approved locations? And so we'll be talking about what do those permits look like? What do people need? For example, and I'm just putting it out there because I've talked about it before, you don't want to suddenly say, well, we're going to do this in a location where there are no bathrooms. If you're having someone go on their journey for 6 or 8 hours, someone's going to need to use a restroom. So, we have to think about things like that. And it may sound very simple and silly, but there are other parts of it too. Like, for example, is it being done in a safe and secure place? What do we mean by safe and secure? That's where we're going to need help determining some of those areas. I hope that makes sense.
No, that's great. I appreciate it. Does anybody have questions about for the program?
We actually just need to do it so it comes out.
I just
We have
curious
a
about.
question in the chat. Shane McDonald said, sorry, but I came in a bit late. Do we have a date for applying for cultivation?
1 second. We have a question in person first here.
Dominic, as you were going through this, you talked about that specific committee. We'll talk about what's interesting to me is they will determine who's qualified to make that determination. Will that be in that particular committee?
It's a great question. That committee is looking at the patient qualifications itself. There is the other committee that's looking at practitioners. And, as far as what that is going to be, because that's going to be the education and training piece and who is going to be able to do the different aspects in the different areas. That's a great question, though. Okay, and Katie, what's the question online?
Shane McDonald said, sorry, but I came in a bit late. Do we have a date for applying for cultivation?
Thank you. No, those dates aren't. We do not have those dates yet. We're hoping that we're going to be able to have those applications this summer. And part of that will depend exactly on when we have the hearing for the rules and if there are major changes that need to be made or if there are no major changes.
Oh, do you still have the mic over there? Oh, yeah.
Do we have anyone else online while we're transferring the mic?
We do not.
No? Okay,
We do not.
thank you.
Okay, lastly, I'm sorry. Do you foresee that working in for example, like RLD for years was paper-based, turn things in, and they recently changed to web-based application processes that are, I think, managed out of state. Do you foresee that you'll start off with something more like the old model for them, or will it start out web-based and so on?
Well, I'll start with that because when we started the program with Department of Health for medical cannabis, going online was not even an option. And so we had to start on paper, but we actually were transferring over and we actually had built the system to do the online portals for applications before the CRA went into effect and all of that aspect transferred over to RLD. We just hadn't been able to implement it because of just that happening so quickly. However, if you are, or for anybody who's a patient with regard to medical cannabis, we've been online for several years and we are not going back to paper. If you actually ask anyone, you'll hear me say that, wait, that's on paper? Why do I have paper in front of me? It really should be electronic. It makes it a lot easier for review, for edits, if edits need to happen. If, for example, say we go through an application and, you know, like with the permit and someone accidentally forgot to upload a particular certification that they needed. We can review it and it can be much easier for them to then amend it and add that sort of thing. So no, we will not be doing paper. It will be going through from that. Now, I say that with a caveat because the system has to be built. So there is a small possibility that the very first cultivators may have to give us a little bit of paper. But part of our goal is that we will not be doing that and that it will be all electronic. By the way, to give you all an idea of how much the electronic side really helps, our patient approval process, when I moved back to medical cannabis in 2019 and we were still on paper applications, we were at the statutory limit of 30 days to review applications because the volume was so much and they were coming in and there would be so much paper. I mean, the amount, the volume, it was crazy. We actually thought that the floor wasn't going to support it at one point, and I'm not joking about that. We had to move all of our records because the floor wasn't going to be strong enough to support it. But since we switched on over to electronic, we now, as of this morning, our processing time from when someone submits an application electronically averages 0.63 days. And the reason it's that high, and I do say that that's high to me, is because if you submit it on a Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock when our office is closed, it's not going to be reviewed until Monday. If we didn't have holidays and weekends, we would probably be within probably at less than 0.25 days to review applications. Now, that doesn't mean it's approved. That means it's reviewed. So just as a reminder, but that gives you an idea of how much of a difference this makes. So when we talk about this, as far as why we want to do it online, it streamlines the process. And that's a part of why we feel once the applications do open up for cultivators and laboratories, that process will be fairly quickly. Won't be less than a day, but it will be pretty quick. Anyway, I hope that helps. I just like to illustrate with real world examples.
Great. All right. Are there any further questions regarding the program as a whole?
I have some questions about something specific, but I assume we're getting into that. Okay, then I'll get that.
Excellent. I don't see any more questions online either. So we had a board meeting last week. I'm sure some of you probably attended, where the proposals that we all came up with over the last couple of months have been approved unanimously to the board. And so the Department of Health has started making rules out of our recommendations, and we're going to get into the permit application requirements portion of that now. So is that already displayed online?
Yes.
All right. Excellent. So I'll just start reading through these and we can stop at each section and discuss as needed. Permit application requirements, Section A. General requirements: an applicant for a producer or laboratory permit shall provide to the department and shall maintain the following records. 1, business license in the state of New Mexico. 2, proof of registration with New Mexico Secretary of State.
Are we asking questions as you go along? You want to read them?
I would like to read through this section and then we'll talk about that section if that works. 3, proof of registration with New Mexico Taxation and Revenue Department. 4, certificate of occupancy. 5, proof of fire code compliance. 6, electrical and HVAC inspection reports. 7, proof of compliance with applicable city and county planning zoning requirements. 8, proof that facility is within the geographical boundaries of New Mexico. 9, proof of ownership of the facility or written approval from the owner to cultivate psilocybin on the premises. 10, conditional use permits where applicable. For example, City of Albuquerque raw food permit. 11, an attestation that all psilocybin and psilocybin products will be produced or tested as applicable to the permit type, only within the state of New Mexico, and will not be transported beyond the borders of the state of New Mexico. And 12, such additional documentation as the department may reasonably request to ensure compliance with this rule or other applicable laws, regulations, or ordinances. All right. Now I'll open it up for comments, please.
All right. Use the mic.
Thank you. I think just clarity on some of these, from my perspective, proof of registration for what? For my Secretary of State, but for business or lobbyist or what? It's not very clear.
So any business needs to register with the, with both Secretary of State and Tax and Revenue. And that's all that is needed is that, and so like the first one, for example, shows business license in the state of New Mexico. And so you would have to show that you have that business license. And then in addition to having a business, you still have to register with both the Secretary of State and with Tax and Revenue, for example.
I
So
guess
it all
my question
follows
is,
through.
I think the Secretary of State has multiple things that they register for. And it's not clear as to exactly what it is you would be sending somebody over there for.
And that's the business license aspect. That's why that starts at the very top and it follows through. I get what you're saying. That's how that works when writing regulations. You start at the top and then it all follows down through. So in this case, you would go and you would obtain your business license. Then you would show that you have registered that business with the Secretary of State and then prove and show that you have registered and have that registration with New Mexico Tax and Revenue.
Again, I don't think it's clear, but, and then I guess the other thing is on number 6, I guess 2 comments here. Do we know that we're asking local governments to do several things here. One, do we know that they actually do those things? I've been surprised before in rules that we've asked people to do things and local governments say, we don't do those things. And so I just want to make sure that in fact, when somebody shows up to local government and asks for an inspection report, you know, like the electrical and HVAC, are we asking for a code compliant inspection? Is that what this is?
Yes, and for example, and so the electrical and HVAC inspection is usually done as part of that certificate of occupancy. And so we're just asking for that to also be provided.
Okay, I just think this could be clearer. And then on items 7 and 10, it seems to me a conditional use is part of a zoning code. The zoning codes are structured in such a way that they have special use permits or special exceptions. Special exceptions, and special exceptions are either variances or conditional uses. And so it looks like you're mixing a health permit, like a raw food permit, with a zoning matter. And it just seems confusing to me. Because a conditional use is not for a food permit, it's for a zoning action. So I would just bring that to your attention.
Okay, thank you.
So when I'm reading through these things, like the CO, fire code, inspection, just mentioning. So I know many times when you're going through these processes for other types of permits with the state of New Mexico, you have a local municipality, whether it's Albuquerque or Santa Fe, they're phased in, so to speak, you know, where you go and you do a certain part of it with the state. The state says you are in Albuquerque. So then they go, stand by, we're done with this part. We're going to send that to the city of Albuquerque. I assume that's going on behind the scenes, like where, so if I live at, you know, if my business is going to be at such address in Albuquerque, Albuquerque also has to approve that that's an appropriate use for that address. And so will it be similar to previous programs, say like alcohol, will those people talk to each other and the city will get wrap up several of these things in that process so that they can present us with something that then we come back to the state and go, here it is?
Yes, and that's a part of the application process to be able to go through it. Remember, this is just what the requirements are going to be for a final
We're
permit.
getting too deep into permitting is what you're saying, instead of just the rules.
Yeah, well, and the next step, and that's a part of what I was saying earlier, is part of the process may take a little bit of time. What you're thinking about is, okay, we go through this step. So for, as you mentioned, so we say, okay, as a state, we have brought it to this level. We are saying that you're good so far, or, you've submitted what you need to. Now, the city or the municipality or county sometimes would say, okay, now that you've got this, you've made it this far. Now we'll go out and do the inspections on X, Y, and Z and do that. And then we get the information on back. That's a part of why doing it electronically is going to be much easier than doing it paper. Yeah, that's a great question.
I have a question in the chat. Is there any way that we can get people commenting in the room to self-identify?
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, so in the chat, somebody just asked whether or not we can have people just say what their name is when they're having a question, so they know who's talking. So.
James Blackboard here. So this is just a general, like, maybe this can happen. I understand that different cities, whenever you register your business with the city, there are certain requirements that's approved on the local level, as they may differ from where you are. Would it be at all possible, because I know the Department of Health isn't looking for more work, as far as like looking over what's good and what's not. Would it be possible if, like, even 4 through 8, if one registers their business with this city, that all of these would kind of be in the city's responsibility, that would fall under that. So it's just not something the Department of Health would have to mess with if the business was registered with the city. I don't know if that's possible, unless work for y'all.
And I appreciate that, James. Thank you. This is Dominic, by the way, responding. I appreciate that. The unfortunate part is not all locations are within a municipality or even fall under county. There are many unincorporated areas. And so in order to also include that aspect, we have to still do it for everybody. But because those are things that will be a part of that process, for example, when someone's going and getting their fire inspection done, for example, that'll be a part of what they have to do. We're not asking them to do additional work. They'll just have to submit that as well. And again, this goes back to the electronic version. We're not going to have piles of paper sitting around to actually potentially create a fire code issue. So. But I appreciate that, because as we've kind of said, if there's someone else who's doing it and we don't need to do that, then that's going to help speed up the process. It's going to make it a lot better and a lot easier. And so I appreciate that. Okay. Any other questions? Do we have any online?
No. Nope.
Okay. Chris, do you want me to read the next section?
Yeah, sure. There is.
Oh, as asked. Okay. What?
Okay, yeah, we've got one question online. Let's see, are these draft, and this is Orion, are these draft permit application rules, or are these the decided rules for the program, and are they available online?
So as I mentioned earlier, these are draft, and once they're finished, we are going to be publishing them, and then they will go through the rule hearing where additional public comment can be made. Okay, so section B. So Chris, this is why I chose section B. It's only a paragraph. Additional producer application requirements. An applicant for a producer permit shall additionally provide to the department and maintain food safety training certificates for employees. Any questions on that? No, don't be sorry at all.
No, I'm not.
It's,
That's why we're here. James Blackboard again. I assume.
Oh, I don't think the mic is on. There we go.
There we go. James Blackboard again. I assume in that statement, it's implied that if you don't have any employees, if you're just sole proprietor doing it, that you would still be required for that. It wouldn't just be because it's only one person. And then I assume that would be New Mexico food safety training certificate.
There are actually several different food safety training certificates. For example, Bernalillo County has their own, and a specific one if you're within Bernalillo County. And so it really is any applicable food safety training certificate.
Okay, this would be a food safety training certificate. Because it seems like isn't like food handling broken down into different types of categories? Or would it be the same food safety training certificate that say if you're serving food at a restaurant to this, it would be the same? Okay.
Correct.
Okay, all right, cool, thank you.
Okay. And then we've got Denali Wilson online. Let me go ahead and unmute you. Okay, Denali, your mic is enabled. You can talk when ready.
Hi, everyone, and sorry, I am this might be relevant to section A, if we're okay going back there. Sorry, I was slow to the draw, but I was just going to make the recommendation that on 9, the proof of ownership of the facility or written approval from the owner to cultivate psilocybin, that we additionally have the option that that the cultivator provide proof of permission through providing a lease agreement, just because I can anticipate the owner of a property premises being reluctant to explicitly write approval for psilocybin for federal illegality reasons. So we might not want to require that the owner of the premises specifically authorize the cultivation of psilocybin, but that by providing a lease agreement that doesn't specifically preclude that would suffice. I just don't want to put renters in an unfair disadvantage if they can't get that written specifically from the property owner.
Thank you, Denali. That's actually a great point, except that we actually have practical experience with that in the past, where with cannabis, some owners who were leasing out the land, after they found out what the purpose was from the renter, they shut them down. And so that meant that those particular businesses invested a lot of money to do something that then they were just kicked out and they had no recourse because it's federally illicit. And so this actually helps to protect the renter if they're renting that property by doing that. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dominic. I'm gonna think on it a little bit more and I'll circle back. I know that this will be just one of many conversations.
Okay, yeah, looks like that's
okay
for now.
So I'll go ahead because I'm not gonna jump you on that, Chris, and not read more. But so part C, additional laboratory application requirements. An applicant for a psilocybin testing laboratory permit shall additionally provide to the department and maintain the following records. 1, a license permit or permit from the New Mexico Regulation and Licensing Department, Cannabis Control Division with A, proof of current approval to operate as a cannabis testing laboratory in New Mexico. B, standard operating procedures for sampling and testing of psilocybin. And C, an initial demonstration of capabilities for each of the tests required by this rule. Or 2, proof of current ISO IEC 17025 or NELAC/TNI accreditation with A, standard operating procedures for sampling and testing of psilocybin, and B, initial demonstration of capabilities for each of the tests required by this rule. And so essentially what this does is this pulls in the aspect that we talked quite a bit in the committees about having those different pathways with regard to if someone's already or a business is already a cannabis laboratory, they already have the equipment, understand the procedures, and so it's a pretty easy switch for them to add psilocybin. Or if they are not currently and are not interested in being a cannabis laboratory, they have another pathway using some of the national accreditation pathways. Now, there's a third part, which as we talked to the attorneys, we didn't really need to add in this section, and that was that if it is the approved laboratory for the department, which is SLD, State Laboratory Division, that they can be utilized, but that, as it was determined, didn't need to be in here. So, any questions, concerns? give people a moment to read. Okay. Want me to continue or I can? It's up to you. Sure. I am good. So the next section, Part D, changes in location, equipment, or status. A permittee shall apply for and shall obtain an amended permit prior to implementing any substantial structural modification to its permitted location. Additionally, a permittee shall notify the department of any change to registrations, licenses, permits, certifications, and any equipment alterations or acquisitions that substantially affect the production process. So say, for example, they're changing, I see a couple of people with questioning faces, and I hope I'm going to answer for the right portion. Say, for example, somebody decides to switch over in a portion of the production and they're using a new piece of equipment, they would need to submit to the department that here's the new procedure because it could potentially have issues with regard to their processes for contamination and other things, and are they actually setting that on up? It's really just to ensure that things are being done safely and cleanly, so to speak. Does that make sense? And to give an example, as far as for structural, we did have, for example, a previous licensee in the cannabis program who they went in and they actually made changes to their building, did not get a new certificate of occupancy, and they ended up actually getting shut down at that time by the construction division because it was unsafe, because they removed a support beam. So that's the reason for it. Not that I anticipate or expect things like that, but then again, you never know what's going to occur. So it really just comes from a safety standpoint.
And then we've got a hand up in the chat.
And so there's a hand in the chat.
Okay, should be good.
Oh, okay. We're good.
All right, Greg, your mic is enabled.
Yeah, I think. If you could mute that.
Oh,
Mike. Yeah. Cool. Much better. So, just first, I want to say that it might be worth having a trigger in here to have a compliance review, depending on the type of change, just to make it super clear. Like if we're putting in reverse osmosis and changing the water and that therefore need a building permit to do that type of work or whatever it is, like that might be something that preempts like a check-in point with compliance. But like for a practical application, say I'm a small company and I'm using a drill bit to blend all of my substrate and I'm doing it all by hand, and one day I get a massive substrate mixer, that would be something that triggers a review and compliance certification. Yeah, is that about, am I understanding that correct?
Thank you, Greg. This is Dominic again. And that's why it does say substantially affects the production process. And so it's doing exactly what you're suggesting.
okay, and then looks like we've got a comment in the chat from Shane McDaniel. Would adding more tents and equipment to meet a demand but not actual construction need to be approved?
Thank you, Shane. This is Dominic. And if it's not changing the actual process, then that would not be something that needs to be approved. Again, this is to substantially change the process. I hope that helps. Okay, do we have other questions?
So when we talk about city permits and all these sort of things and getting certificate of occupancies, you might assume that like it would happen at the level of the municipality about, for example, say someone was, there's different sorts of buildings, different sorts of, say, perhaps manufactured housing, manufactured things that are under the title of equipment. That'll all be settled out on what the local municipality agrees that they may or may not give a CO to.
That's correct.
So What if it's somewhere that meets all of the criteria, sits in a safe and legitimate space, but it doesn't meet the municipality's criteria of something that it can obtain a CO, yet it's more under the, would fit into, say, an equipment category. For example, like shipping containers.
It still would have to meet the municipality or the local jurisdiction's requirements first.
To obtain a CO.
Right. And that actually goes back to, in the other part, it talks about must meet, where is it? That's a part of the question that came up before with regard to, where is it? Sorry, I'm trying to look. Yeah, part 7, proof of compliance with applicable city and county planning, zoning requirements, and then the other portion about the conditional use. Thank you, Jorge, for pointing me to number 7. Other questions? Okay, the next part, this is actually section 7.35.2.9, general permittee requirements. A, compliance with applicable laws. A permittee shall comply with all applicable state, tribal, and local laws, regulations, and ordinances, including requirements concerning agriculture, environmental health, building and occupancy, fire, safety, zoning, and worker safety. Part B, dual ownership prohibited. A person who holds an ownership interest in a permittee shall not hold an ownership interest in any other permittee. Part C, permits non-transferable. A permit shall not be transferred by sale, assignment, or otherwise. A permit that is transferred shall be invalid. Part D, transfer of actual control prohibited. An applicant or permittee shall not transfer actual control of the applicant or permittee to any person using a management, consulting, or intellectual property agreement, or by any other means. A transfer of actual control shall invalidate an associated permit. Part E, nominee, straw, and proxy ownership prohibited. A person shall not apply for or hold a permit if any ownership interest in the permit is nominal or without the benefits and risk of genuine ownership or control. Part F, record of financial interest. Permittees shall create and maintain complete lists of all individuals and legal entities that hold a financial interest in the permittee or the operations of the permittee, including contact information for each individual or entity and a description of their financial interest. Applicants and permittees shall provide the information required by this section to the department within 15 calendar days of the department's written request for such information. If a legal entity holds a financial interest in the permittee or permittee's operations within the medical psilocybin program, the following individuals within the legal entity shall be deemed to also hold a financial interest. 1, for limited partnerships, each general partner in the limited partnership. 2, for limited liability companies, each manager and managing member of the limited liability company. 3, for-profit corporations, each principal officer of the corporation. And 4, for nonprofit entities, each principal officer of the entity. And we'll pause at that point. That's the end of that section for questions.
All right, from Greg Evans in the chat, he has suggestions. On B, he says specify permittee type as producer. Intention is to ensure that we don't prevent producers from also being a lab or other type of permittee in the program. And then F, he says consider including entity types unless intentionally constrained, sole proprietorships, general partnerships, trusts, joint ventures. A sole prop is arguably the simplest case and is not addressed.
Okay, thank you, Greg. And I will be honest, I am not a corporate lawyer or someone from a finance law perspective, but we will bring that back. And And just as a mention too, all of the comments and suggestions will go back to our attorneys to be able to review and look at and see if there are things that need to change, clarifications, those sort of things. That's part of why we're doing this.
Is there anything that you've seen so far in the rules? I picked up on the first part of the questions online that prevents an entity of some sort from being a permittee as a producer and also being a permittee as, say, a provider or provider group. There's nothing to limit that, to prevent them in these rules that I've seen. Am I correct?
So what it really comes down to is anybody who is a permittee cannot be a permittee in another aspect of it. That's why the language is specific with the permittee. And by the way, just so everybody knows, the statute actually says permits rather than licenses, which is why the language throughout the rule is about permits. And so if I accidentally say license, please forgive me. 20 years of talking about licenses and not permits, sometimes I make an error. But because that language, permittees, could be either laboratories, so they would receive a permit, providers receive permits, and then also cultivators receive permits. So with this, an individual can only hold one permit.
Or an entity.
An entity, correct.
So in order to operate in the realm from A to Z, provide total service from patient from beginning to end. How do you do that?
Well, the cultivators would transfer the product to the providers. They would also be transporting, or the laboratory picking up with regard to doing testing. But this is not a situation, because it's a medical program, you want to ensure that there are those separations, because otherwise you could have somebody who, for example, is cultivating and then providing it to patients who is not going through testing. And while we would like to think that everybody all has good intentions, and I prefer to think that, we also have to prepare for individuals who may cut corners as they look at things from cost perspectives and things like that. And so that separation is really there in order to ensure safety and to protect patients in the long run.
It brings up another question.
Can you introduce yourself again, please?
Yeah, my name is John Starr. When you went back to the general permittee, dual ownership permitted, the person who holds an ownership interest in permittee, just want to make sure I understand this right. So say myself, if I'm a member of an LLC that applies and obtains a permit to produce, I cannot be the member of, say, another LLC that requires a permit to be provided.
Correct.
I think there's questions around that, just because I guess that would come up when we have the hearing, right? As far as
you can bring them up now.
Also,
the main issue again is because of potential conflicts of interest.
I understand, but I also understand that there's going to be whether it's people or entities that want to, in a legal way, not participate in any conflicts, say we have this arm and that's our provider arm of what we do for patients. We have this other arm where we grow and produce. And we also have this other arm that if you wanted to be able to bridge rate. Is that all three of them, or is there any more?
That's all three. Right.
Or they may just want two. They want that. They want to be able to help patients over here, but they also want to grow in that thing and go through the legal requirements and maybe provide that to their own provider entity as well as other people's provider entities. But what you're saying is that's not possible.
That's correct, because there would be conflicts of interest with regard to that, because it could be problematic, especially when it comes down to the safety and the testing aspects.
So, no,
we need to just get them.
We've had Denali hands up for a while.
Okay, let's see. We've got one hand up online. Let me get back over here. All right, so Denali Wilson.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, your mic. Yes, there you go.
Hi, I just wanted to acknowledge, I can see, I know we had some conversations in the interim with the department around potentials for protecting against predatory financing. And I can see the origins of that in this section. And so I want to express some gratitude there. I just want to be sure that we get it right and we don't unfairly encumber businesses that are failing, right? And so specifically, I want to talk about the transfer provision. So it's the way that it reads. Can you scroll up, whoever's doing the share screen? Yeah, transfer prohibited. Maybe what it needs to read is that the transfer is prohibited without department approval, right? Because what we don't want is, from a safety perspective and from a predatory protection perspective, we don't want this to be written, like lending to be written to transfer ownership, or if it is, we want people to know that that's what they're agreeing to in a lending, in a financing agreement. But I think from a safety perspective, the department doesn't want the permit to be transferred without their permission. But if somebody has entered into a business interest and that business is failing, we don't want to require them to, essentially become bankrupt because they can't offset that business interest. So I'm just wondering whether it makes more sense to say that the transfer requires department approval rather than that there's no way, if somebody has entered into a cultivation business and it's no longer financially viable for them, I don't think that we're protecting New Mexico interests if we don't allow them a way to sell that business. And I want to be sure that there's a way for somebody to leave a business if it's no longer financially viable. Does that make sense? I kind of stumbled through that.
Thank you, Denali, and this is Dominic. That does make sense, and I understand exactly where you're coming from. What it really is just saying is that if somebody were to sell their business, then the new owners would have to actually apply for a permit. They can't actually transfer the permit itself. And that is in part because of some of the issues, as I'm sure many people know, that we've had with regard to like alcohol licenses in the state and how it's artificially increased those prices. So it's that the business can be sold and the new owners can apply for the permit, but it would not be the permit itself that gets sold. So there's not a monetary value aspect on the permit. I hope that helps.
It does. Thank you so much.
We're going to take a couple comments online.
Yeah, real quick, we got a couple comments online. Let's see. Okay, Shane McDaniel says, what, if any, permits would an integration coach need? Matthew Armstrong says it's a great idea to keep all three separate. And then Shane McDaniel, again, let's see, not allowing a sole proprietorship to have more than one permit would interfere with rural access to treatment, as it might be problematic to get enough people to obtain permits for smaller municipalities. And then Greg Evans said, so what if I'm a cultivator or a company that is a producer and am permitted to do that work? Would that mean that I would not be allowed to be permitted as a facilitator or assistant to ceremonial settings as a second job? So there's a few things there.
Yeah, so, and this is Dominic, so those all pretty much cover the same item overall, just about as far as the permits. And the idea again on that is because in experience that we've had where permits were allowed to be held by the same individual in different areas, it invariably created issues and harm, and that's something that we especially have to keep separate when we're looking at this with regard to patients. And so, and Shane, you had the comment as far as in rural areas, that is an aspect that we are looking at as far as how do we ensure that that can occur. But again, it does come down to the aspect of you don't want to have the same person necessarily growing it, who's also testing it, who's also then administering it. That creates conflict of potential interest, and we need to make sure that that is not occurring.
Yeah, my name is Eric Baca. And I just wanted to comment on the vertical integration is what you guys are talking about. There's not going to be vertical integration with correct? And so as propagators, that's another thing to be thinking about is because of the production cost, but also the value of the product that you're producing, and there not really being a set standard on those amounts, the people potentially that are going to be profiting here is the provider in some form, you know. I'm not saying that there's not profit for propagation, but these are things that need to be considered as well. If you're not able to vertically integrate or hold two licenses, then what the value of your product you're producing and what you're going to be selling it to a provider for needs to be taken into consideration. As far as like the value currently of like street price or whatever you want to say for psilocybin mushrooms or whatever, it doesn't really compute to being profitable unless you have that figured out. So like, you know, I'm just trying to tell everybody that you know, we were talking about Washington, or what was the state? I think Oregon, one of the states there, maximum, or what they did for 2025 was what, 15 kilograms? So if you think about that financially, that's like what, 30 plus pounds a year? So that's easily done in a month by a producer, you know what I mean? Even with like a 25 by 25, or even smaller than that, 12 by 12, you could produce that amount. So that's, you know, what I'm wrapping my head around right now and trying to compute how it's profitable for a propagation license. And that's all that you know, we got to figure those things out because, like I said, even the providers are dealing with what a medical-based, you know, consultation. There's fees that come in that have nothing to do with the product, you know, and nothing to do with the scale of the product. So there's going to be profits made on that. There's going to be all of those things. But what is a propagation permit? You know, how is it going to be profitable for you? So those are things that are going to have to be, and maybe there's, I don't know, a committee that kind of handles that or whatever. I mean, that doesn't really work for like capitalist reasons, but I guess, I don't know, these are things that we need to think about though. That's all I have to say.
I think this is probably the, there's other people online. So there are other people online who can,
If you could introduce
I
yourself as well.
understand what you're saying about you've had experiences and results in conflicts of interest, but it appears to me, I agree with what you're saying. The ability to create your own market for your product has been totally eliminated with this potential conflict of interest that seems to be handled by rules and governance. To jump right to there could be public interest, so therefore we're not doing it, I think is just a step too far in my opinion. And the ability, along the lines of what you're talking about, to create your own market, a good quality market, where you do participate in more than one arm, I think makes a lot of sense. And then to eliminate it by the potential conflict is probably a little bit short-sighted and should just be controlled with rules and governance and make sure that it doesn't happen.
I appreciate it, and we will bring it on back to the legal team. But part of what I can say, and I'll bring this up as a scenario, is I'm sure most people are very familiar with regard to our opioid crisis. And what happened quite a bit with regard to that is you had people who were involved in both manufacturing and creating the market. And so they were saying and pushing that people take the opioids simply because they had minor conditions, causes the issue that we have. And so we can envision that you could have somebody who is growing for themselves and growing, or I mean, not for themselves, but for their own then company that is then doing the actual services and providing therapy, who are actually saying, hey, we're going to increase our number of patient load because then we're going to be able to increase our amount of production. And that's where the concern and that conflict of interest comes. Now, do I want to think that people would potentially do that? No, I don't want to think that, but we have seen that happen. And we have seen it in multiple industries. And so we do need to be very cautious with regard to that. Now, does that mean that there's not potential for that to change down the road when we figure other safeguards? Potentially. But right now, at this point, we have to look at it from this needs to be the safest program that we can actually implement. We need to ensure that the patients who are getting treatment are getting appropriate treatment, that products are tested, and that we're able to actually move this forward in a way that ensures that safety and doesn't create those potential conflicts. So I completely hear you and understand, because from a financial side, yes, it would seem as though, oh, if we're growing it and then we're selling it to the patients, then that would be a great way from a financial standpoint. But it also brings up concerns about safety. Because then, for example, someone may be less inclined that if the batch does have contamination, for them to actually then dispose of the batch because they put in that financial interest in growing it. And then they're potentially providing that to patients or avoiding testing in some way if they're part of a testing laboratory. And that's why there's that separation. And they are things that have happened in many different ways in many different industries.
It's handled that and historically been done. And right back to earlier, I asked about the question about
Earlier, John Starr, earlier when I talked about the separate committee and who would be required for the people that are able to say you fall. Well, potentially I say that's, depending on how that is established, whether it's someone that has to hold a medical license or whether it's like a nurse practitioner or whatever that level of education is. There's already systems in place statewide and federally that hold them to a standard where the same thing that happened during the opioid crisis. I worked in pain medicine for 20 years and they're held accountable. And so those same safeguards should be something that is sensible enough to prevent those with what we're doing here in this. If we're having the right level of requirements for those people that say you're a candidate. I mean, I think those people are held to very high standards, just like they hold a DEA license, state medical license, or any of those things. And I just want to make sure that it's noted in the record that those things should be things that are in place already that should safeguard us from those potential conflicts of interest and not limit commerce and not limit the ability to treat this as a business move.
Thank you.
James Burr, this is actually an easy one. So I don't see it anywhere in here, but is there a cap on licensing?
Thank you. There is no cap on it. Anybody who is able to meet the qualifications, submit the appropriate items, would be able to be permitted.
And then we've got a couple comments in the chat. Okay, from Shane McDaniel. Did not get an answer to the integration coach permit question. Can we return to that? Okay, let me go back to that. Okay, so, oh yeah, he was just asking what, if any, permits would an integration coach need? And he additionally comments, integration coaches would never actually be in contact with the medicine, so I would not expect them to need a permit.
Thank you for the question, Shane. This is Dominic. And again, part of that has to be determined still by the Education and Training Committee as to what exactly those requirements will be. But I do believe that you're correct as far as an integration coach or a guide most likely would not have a permit. But again, that has to be determined by that particular committee. Do you have additional questions?
I don't see any more hands up online.
Cool. Okay. And then the last section that we have today is the general producer requirements. And this is section 7.35.2.10. A producer shall, only cultivate, manufacture, and possess psilocybin and psilocybin products on the producer's permitted premises and shall not transport psilocybin outside the state of New Mexico. 2, use equipment, counters, and surfaces for post-harvesting processes that are food grade and do not react adversely with any solvent being used. 3, construct and maintain floors, walls, ceilings, counters, and surface areas in a manner that reduces the potential development of microbials, molds, and unintended fungi. 4, Maintain the licensed premises in a manner that is free from conditions that may result in contamination of psilocybin products and that is suitable for safe and sanitary operations. 5. Store all psilocybin products in a secured, locked area, including psilocybin products that require refrigeration. 6. Associate every harvest lot, homogenized lot, and product lot with a unique identification number and enter this information into the traceability system. 7. Only sell psilocybin or psilocybin products to other producers and to practitioners, and only otherwise distribute psilocybin or psilocybin products to medical psilocybin testing laboratories or to department employees for testing in accordance with this rule. And then 8, immediately discontinue operations and notify the department in the event of an imminent health hazard that could result in contamination of psilocybin products. And that's the end of that section. So are there questions or concerns? Comments? And of course, we'll pause for a minute so people can digest it.
We do have a comment online. All right, Gregory Evans says, but we have robust and rigorous chain of custody as well as testing that would mitigate those risks. If the permittees had separate business licenses, the product would have to be tested and transferred by record to be in compliance. I respect the intention regarding manipulation of the market, but it all just seems manageable on this scale. I will concede to the committee, but it's alarming to me.
Thank you, Greg. Do we have other comments or questions?
My name is Randy Trainer. Just a question, when these rules go out for public comment, are these sent to Tax and Rev, Secretary of State, Municipal League, Association of Counties, Construction Industries Division?
So they're put out publicly, and yes, it does go out through the register, the New Mexico Register, which also contacts those various agencies.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments?
Manny Griego. I would just had a question on number 7, only sell psilocybin or psilocybin products to other producers and practitioners. So does that mean if I'm a producer, I can sell liquid culture to another producer or share those kinds of things? That's just kind of built in.
Yeah, that's a great question, and the answer is yes.
Sure.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Chris?
All right, so having got through that, we have another meeting here next week in Santa Fe where I'm assuming we're going to get another drop of draft regulations that we're going to go over. But I'd like to open it up at this time for anything that, you know, we've made our initial recommendations, but has anybody thought of anything that we may have missed or need to address any gaps?
Oh, and just real quick, I'm just going to read a comment in here. There's just 2 comments in here real quick. Orion says, number 4 seems very broad. That's the maintain licensed premises in a manner that's free from conditions part. Let's see, seems very broad. What standards are we asking producers to uphold specifically? And then Shane says regarding liquid culture, can that be purchased across state lines?
As far as for the first part with 4, there's actually another section that's being developed that goes into those details a little bit more. That's just the general aspect of it. And then as far as that, the liquid culture, you'd have to look a little bit more at the federal law on it. I am not sure because my understanding is that spores are not necessarily problematic, but I do not know the answer to that myself. Perhaps Denali, if you're still on, maybe you know the answer regarding that. But with regard to the regulations, we'd only be looking at internal to New Mexico.
Let's see, Denali, do you happen to know? I see your mic is still enabled. Okay, she does not know.
Oh.
Sorry.
No, you're good. All right, moving on then.
There is.
We've got.
There was an answer right after Denali.
Oh, there's an answer. Okay. It's okay. Yeah, Shane McDaniel. It's currently legal to purchase across state lines. All right. Thank you. Okay, and we had an in-person question. Perfect.
James Blackboard here again. So I mentioned it before, and this may not be established. I know there's so many different arms to this thing as it's all kind of forming. But from the cultivator standpoint, I think New Mexico is going to be different than the other 2 states because we're requiring the end product to be homogenized, and I don't think it's like that in the other states, correct? So with it being homogenized, obviously it has to go in some type of capsule form or whatever. So just mentioning, the standardization of, quantity sizes, requiring different equipment and stuff like that to encapsulate the product. If there is a conversation on that still kind of happening in the background.
Thank you, James. That's a good question. And I think a lot of that is going to depend on the dosage. And there is the committee that is talking about dosage at this point, but we're not putting in a specific size limit on it. So for example, if it ends up the dosage is twice the amount of, say, you're putting it into a gelatin capsule, then it would be the individual would take 2, for example. Right. So we're not limiting as far as that size. We're not getting into that kind of detail with regard to the manufacturing side. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I guess it's the increment, sorry.
I guess it's the increment of it because if it's going in, 0.20 or 0.25, that would be a difference in, the size of capsules to get, just the different density and stuff like that. That's all.
Yeah, and I completely understand on that, but that again is going to come down to what the dosage committee determines would be the recommended doses. So I don't have an answer on that because they haven't determined that yet. Oh, and I should mention that also allows for example, sachets. So for example, while that aspect is being done, if there was a cultivator, for example, who does not want to buy that equipment to do the encapsulating portion or pill presses, that sort of thing, they could do it just in sachets, which can easily be at the administration, could be used as teas and in that sort of methodology. So just to give you an idea, because we did have that, I remembered it was, 2 or 3 months ago, we had that conversation, but I couldn't tell you which committee. So, yeah, but thank you.
Will you remind me of the dosage committee on Monday?
Oh, and yeah, for those who aren't aware, the dosage committee is meeting virtually on Monday. What's the time frame on that one?
9 a.m.
At 9 a.m. So if you have interest in that part, I would suggest joining in.
All right, we've got a question in the chat. Priscilla Smith says, what constitutes a lot? Is that specified elsewhere? Is there a weight limit?
Okay. Thank you very much. That is going to be elsewhere. We're using the term, there's batches and lots, but essentially the homogenized batch is essentially going to be the 1 kilogram. It is written, the way we're looking at it is we're writing it slightly different just because it's more about testing, but it will be that 1 kilogram will be that marker, if that makes sense. So what the committee said is that a batch will be 1 kilogram of homogenized product, so dried and homogenized.
So are we just changing the term to lot for the purposes of the program? Okay, Dominic's shaking his head yes. Assuming that. Any further gaps or things that we need to address on the propagation side that people can think of? All right, we can move to any discussion topics that we haven't already talked about. Yeah. In regards to this, or I'm willing to open it up to other aspects of the program, although we can't really speak on behalf of other committees. So. All right, with no further questions. Oh, wait, we have something online?
Yes. Okay, yes, we've got one hand up, Priscilla Smith, and I have allowed your mic. You can unmute when ready.
Hello, my name's Priscilla Smith, and I am with Crystal Clear Analytics, which is a cannabis testing laboratory here in New Mexico. I don't know if it's mentioned here or somewhere else, but I'm just wondering if other products are going to be tested besides the raw form. There would need to be a batch size on that as well, so people understand the limits of their product, how far that C of A extends to their product, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you, Priscilla. The only other testing that we were discussing through the committee and was recommended was that if products were sitting on the shelf for too long, then they would need to be retested at that point in time. And within the rules we had talked about when testing occurs, and please forgive me because I don't have that aspect right in front of me, but I believe it was 2 to 5 grams. Was that correct? Yeah. Or 2 to 4 grams? Yeah, my apologies. Without it right in front of me, I don't recall, but it's about 2 to 5 grams required for the testing. And part of that will be determined by the laboratory's SOP. So for example, if you only, as a laboratory, would only need 2 grams, you could pull just that 2 grams for that testing. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. I think what I'm talking about is the batch size of products. So for cannabis, I don't know how this transfers to this industry, but for cannabis, there's edibles, there's concentrates, and there's flower or plant material. And the batch sizes are needing to be defined for each product that needs to be tested. So 1 C of A works for 1 kilogram of raw material is what you're saying. But I just want to make sure that transfers into other products, that batch sizes are defined somewhere for those other products.
Thank you. And yes, it's only the homogenized product that's going to be available. And the only way that can be distributed at this time, as part of the recommendation, is either through sachets or pills or capsules that are created from the dried homogenized batch. And that batch being the 1 kilogram.
Thank you.
Thank you. Eric here again. I just wanted to recap because I wasn't quite sure. I missed one of the meetings. And were we still at an impasse on microdose because of not being able to only be able to use it in an approved facility? Was that still the case? Or?
So for the initial portions of the program, we are not looking at microdose. And the main reason, again, is because there are other aspects that need to be determined and need to be developed. That's going to take longer than this initial rollout in December. And again, the main reason why is the statute also states that there must be the preparatory session, the administration, and then the integrative afterwards, and that it must occur in the approved locations.
Okay.
So as we roll the program out, we determine other ways to ensure safety and all of those things. There's that possibility, but we're not ready to start going into those details at this time. But again, because we don't have them, because we'll have to determine what those will be, and doing that within the strictures of the statute.
Thank you.
All right, and we got a question in the chat from Shane McDaniel. Would probably need A and B samples. So if 2 grams are needed for a test, producers would need to send 4 grams, right?
Thank you, Shane. Again, that would depend on their procedures for the particular laboratory. But yes, that's correct. So if they are looking at needing to take multiple samples at 2 grams each, that would make 4 grams in the sample. And it's part of why we included that as a range, so that there would be that flexibility and ability to do those multiple tests as needed. Other questions?
All right, with no other questions, we'll go ahead and bring this meeting to a close. And our next meeting will be in Santa Fe on the 18th at 3 p.m. And Johnny, will you tell us what our venue is?
Yes, it is the Gary Carruthers building, and Gary is spelled in a different way than you've ever seen it before. So just know that the way it's spelled on the site is correct. But yeah, and I actually forget exactly where that is, but it's the Gary Carruthers building and it's on the website.
And I'm not going to set up any propagation committee meetings past that for a little while until we get some more rules promulgated or drafted, rather, for us to take a look at. But we'll set up another meeting probably at the conclusion of that. So thank you all again for your attendance, for your work, for your attention, and I appreciate you all so much.
Thanks.